right, hey everybody. Um, I wanted to have a look at this four mic technique that I've been using a lot. Uh, I haven't been using it for sessions for clients, but I have been using it for YouTube videos and Instagram videos and demoing and recording with my band, Atomic Radio. And it's a mic technique that I've actually shot a video on before, and I'll post a link. I'll post a card or something. And I got it from looking at a lot of pictures on Pinterest. Actually, looking at a lot of pictures of my favorite drummers, John Bonham and Mitch Mitchell and Bill Ward and Charlie Watts, and it's not necessarily a studio mic technique. It's something I got from looking at a lot of live pictures, uh, and the crux of it is really, I guess you can already see on the screen over here, is this floor under mic. And so I'll just jump right into it. Um, Typically in the 60s, you'll see a bass drum mic and a mono overhead. This is, again, before this convention of having stereo overheads. It was usually just a mono overhead, and I really like mono overheads because they're right above the drum set, and the balance you get of drums versus cymbals is closer to what it is we want. I've said it in other videos before, where we often use space pair. That's, I think, the most popular configuration, and that ends up right over the cymbals, and then, well, we just get a lot of cymbals versus drums. Whereas a mono overhead or Glyn Johns, those put the ambient microphones, the overheads, right above the drum set, and the balance is quite a bit nicer, I find, between the drums and the cymbals. So we'll often see a bass drum mic, a mono overhead, and a snare mic. Motown always had a snare mic. You see it in a lot of pictures, studio pictures and stuff, cropping up, I think, closer to the late 60s. And if you've recorded drums with this configuration before, you'll definitely notice that the top tom, especially at the time that top toms were kind of tuned higher than they are today, really project into that mono overhead. And then the thing that you end up missing a little bit of is the floor tom. Everything else is represented. The bass drum, snare drum with having its own dedicated microphone. The cymbals are never going to be underrepresented. They're always going to be there. And the top tom is kind of really making it into that mono overhead that's kind of parked right on top of it as well. So it's just the floor tom. So in a lot of these pictures that I've seen on Pinterest from late 60s, let's say early 70s, coming up to, close to the mid 70s, but really that period, you see a bass drum microphone, snare drum, a mono overhead, and then you'll often see a floor tom mic. So it could look like Glyn Johns, but I don't think it is. I think it's definitely a close mic on the floor tom. Now, in some of these pictures, instead of the mic being on top of the floor tom, you see the mic under the floor tom. Now, that makes a lot of sense when, for example, Bill Ward started removing the resonant head on his toms, and it made a lot of sense to put a mic under there. But I've got pictures of, for example, Mitch Mitchell's drum set with that mic configuration, and he had reso heads on his toms. So I figured I'd try it, because one thing I've been noticing, and you can see this in some of my other videos, in my 8-mic videos, is that I like having a microphone under the drum set, whether it's like my kick snare mic or just a bottom snare mic, because a lot of top end exists under there because of the snare wires, and the drums kind of naturally baffle the microphone from the cymbals. And that's really what's happening over here, where the floor tom under mic is giving us bottom snare every time we impact the drum, which is adding believable top end and definition to the drum. And it's not getting too much cymbal, so I call that free top end. I call it free definition. Sometimes we want a little more from the shells, a little more from the drum, so we'll try to add 10K, 7, 8K, and we're trying to get a little more bite. But in turn, we're also bringing up the cymbals, and having a microphone under the drum set allows us to do that without bringing up too much cymbal. And the other advantage to this is that since the top tom isn't close mic'd, I feel like having the floor tom close mic'd, even though the top tom is well represented in the mono overhead, it's still going to lead to an imbalance. That floor tom is going to be quite a bit fuller and more punchy than the top tom. And, you know, the thing about using minimal miking is that you kind of have to relinquish this idea of like the 12 mic drum sound. It's not going to sound that way. So having the toms balanced and a little more mid-rangey and a little less impactful, but very natural and open and real, is cool. I really like it. And having the microphone under the floor tom still gives you the resonance of the floor tom and lets you know you're hitting it, but not like having like a 421 or a 414 right on it, you know. So let's have a listen to the drum sound without the floor tom under mic first. Let's have a listen to those 3 microphones, and then we'll look at how I'm mixing it. I'm gonna put it in now. A little more top end, a little more length. A little more length on the, and a little more attack on the kick. The drum sound just sounds a little more complete. Sorry. When I did this in the studio for my rock band, Atomic Radio, I decided that even though it was going to be this big, dense rock thing, I wanted to try this out with this drum set, with this old Slingerland here. And the engineer, a good friend of mine, and the guitar player in the band, Derek Orsi, we did this at his studio, the Freak Shop here in Montreal. And when he kind of got a sound going with the kick, the snare, and the mono overhead. And then when he turned on the floor tom under mic and he used a condenser mic, I believe we used a Vanguard. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Or a Gaffel. I think we used a Gaffel microphone. He said, "Whoa, sounds like it's in Technicolor now." It just, all of a sudden, a bunch of top end came in and a bunch of life and realism came in. And on its own, it sounds very weird, but it does add a lot of the nice, real mid-range and top end that we want to hear in the drum sound, without trying to get that from EQ on the mono overhead, for example, or on the snare top mic, which can lead to a lot of problems with leakage, with hi-hats, and just with cymbals in general. So here's the microphone on its own, the floor tom under mic, the secret weapon of this drum sound. I'm playing the ride now, but you're getting a lot more kick. Right? A lot more kick, snare, and floor tom. Playing the hi-hat there. Right? So this is interesting. Let's have a listen to the microphones alone. So for the kick drum mic, I'm using C414. All the microphones are going through my API 3124, and then straight into this Soundcraft Signature MTK 22 console. Not an expensive console at all, really an inexpensive piece of kit, and it's pretty cool. So kick drum 414 with processing. Without. Really nice without, actually. May have added too much low end. In. Snare drum is an SM58, just because in a lot of those pictures, that's what I see. I see that kind of ball capsule, and I just thought it looks cool, so I threw up a 58 instead of a 57. Without processing. Processing in. The mono overhead is the Warm Audio 47 Junior. I love this mic. I've said that before in other videos. It's inexpensive, and it really bats above its price range. And you'll notice now in a lot of these live pictures, the overhead is still kind of pretty high up, and there's probably also a visual thing. You don't want a microphone kind of right in front of the drummer's face. You want to see the drummer live, at least. But in the studio, when you look at a lot of these pictures of 60s recording sessions, you'll see that the mono overhead, especially when it's just a bass drum mic and an overhead, is really kind of like at eye level with the drummer. So you actually want to get it kind of pretty low. So that's where it is right now. Let's have a listen. That top tom really came through. Actually, let's have a listen to that again. See, the top tom is almost louder than the snare drum. But very balanced picture of the kit. No processing. Back in. I'm actually getting a lot of floor tom, to tell you the truth. Again, when you tune the drums higher, they're going to project more into the ambient microphones, at least the near ambient microphones, but in general, the ambient microphones. So you're kind of balancing the energy between the drums and the cymbals when you tune them higher. And I think just having the drums tuned higher also kind of works with this 60s mentality of miking drums, not necessarily recording drums, because this was a live mic technique, but in general, just miking drums as kind of like this jazz unified instrument. I've said that before in my one mic drum video, where when you tune them higher, they kind of resonate together, and and everything kind of just behaves as this coalesced singular instrument, and then you capture it with less microphones, right? And then once we started to get into close miking things, that's when we started to tune things lower so that there was less sympathetic vibration, resonance and vibration. And that's when we started to, like tape things up. But for the most part, this drum sound is part of it working, part of the microphone array working is the way we tune and play the drums. So the way we play the drums is we balance the limbs. It's something we talk about often, but trying to play the cymbals a little less loud and trying to get the bass drum and the snare drum and the toms to project, and to get the toms to project at roughly the same level as the snare drum, which means we can't go too hard on the snare if we want to leave a little headroom for those toms. And then the tuning philosophy, which is, to open them up and let them, and try to give as much drum information out into the air above us as possible, so that the mono overhead really gets a nice big dose of drums to be able to tweak, to be able to, stick to tape, and then the compressor will kind of go and grab a little bit more of it and stuff. So let's have a listen to this bottom floor tom, under floor tom microphone again. Here I'm using an EV, an Electro Voice 635A. I'll post a video, or I did post a video. I posted a short of this mic technique, but with another Warm Audio as the floor tom under mic, and it's really, really cool. I probably prefer it. I just decided to do this right now, and I feel like a lot of it's have this microphone, and it works really well. So here it is. Without processing, it's like this. So I'm adding top end for sure. Right? Free top end. The ride cymbal isn't really changing, it's more the snare drum. Right? Hi-hat isn't really changing either. So that's the magic of that floor tom under mic. This is a mono drum sound. I'm using a stereo reverb, just the free. I don't know if it's still free, but the CLA Echosphere, and it's a plate, so there's a bit of slap. And I always bring this down. These are, I've said this in other videos. I often do the same processing on the microphones. What changes is my approach to the drum set, the tuning, and the playing, and which drum set I'm using. As you can see, I have a couple of choices here, and the miking. And then a lot of the stuff that I use to spread the drum set out into the speakers is stuff I've landed on through just like years of trial and error, and stuff that like I know how it's going to push against the corners, you know, and the top and the bottom, and I know how it's going to react in the car speakers. So I'm less surprised, you know, but we can go through it again. So first of all, drum bus, I like to use the Kramer Pi compressor. I'll bypass. Back in. I'm probably adding some level. And I'm letting it compress a little more than I usually would because that just seems like a 60s thing to do, is to let the bus compressor, the drum bus, kind of work a little bit harder and feel some of that compression, you know. Like when I listen to Crosstown Traffic, I really feel like I'm hearing the compressor kind of pump almost in time with the song, like it's a part of the rhythm section, you know. And the drum sound that we love on Beatles' Revolver record has a lot to do with a Fairchild really pumping, and that's kind of like a feature of late 60s drum sounds, you know. So bass drum, doing my usual stuff on the SSL, which is adding a bit of top end. I don't know why it's like this. There you go. I'm removing some high mid. Don't know why. Let's have a listen to that a second. Let me mute the Sheps. Bypass the Sheps. Probably for the cymbals, because it's an out mic, that's why. Yeah. Adding some bottom, and I always send the EQ into the compressor. I gotta say, I don't usually compress this much. I don't know why I guess it's to get some of that vintage flavor where it just feels a little more tapey and compressed. And it kind of blooms. This bass drum has a lot of information. First of all, the old Slingerlands, more so than any other drums that I have. There's so much mid-range and just layer after layer of harmonic in the mid-range that I find super interesting, and especially in this bass drum. And you can, if I guess in this case I overcompressed it, because it just kind of blooms and gives me that thing that I'm feeling while I'm playing it. A lot of what I do when I'm mixing, and I've said this in other videos before, is I'm trying to recreate what it feels like to play the drums. You know, a lot of times we send our tracks to mix engineers and producers, and they mix the drums in such a way that we don't recognize our performances anymore. I've had that conversation with other drummers, and I think I learned to mix drums the way I like to hear them, because I hate that feeling. You know, I really wanna recognize, because I'm playing when I'm doing a track, I'm playing according to my instincts, and my instincts are reacting to what I'm hearing while I'm playing. So a lot of what I do when I'm mixing is really to recreate that realism, the things that I'm feeling when I'm playing drums, you know. So that's the SSL, and then the Sheps 1073. Adding some top end, again removing some of that 1K and adding some 60. I wonder what happens if I add a little more of that mid-range. Let me back this up, sorry. I actually like that better. Might be these headphones though, I'm not used to these. as opposed to what I had before. Let's hear that in context a second while we're at it. What we had before. And more mid-range. I might leave that like that. All right, well, let's have a listen to the snare drum. Again, I shape things with the SSL. Let's take off the Sheps. This is the Waves SSL. I always use the Waves SSL and the Waves Sheps on pretty much everything, just because I've gotten used to it over the years. Adding top end, high mid, removing a bit of low mid, adding a bit of 150. I actually have the expander going. Well, I guess because the mono overhead and the floor tom under are giving me a lot of definition on the snare drum. I just want some crack from the snare top mic. And always sending the EQ into the compressor, and very little compression going on here on the snare drum. Right, and then with the Sheps, I always link the input and output, go all the way up, and put the preamp all the way up, because I just feel like I'm getting my money's worth. So this is scooping a little more. I'm adding quite a bit of 12K. I'm removing, there's a lot of crack, especially on that thin Supraphonic snare, but in general, also in a smaller room with lower ceilings like this. So I tend to remove 1.6 with the Sheps and add 220. The Neve 220 band on snare drums, there's just something magic that happens. Speakers really like it. So there you go. For the mono overhead, I'm really just using the SSL. I'm not even using a Sheps. I'm not doing any additional shaping. So adding a bit of bottom, because I want to feed some bottom end into the compressor. I like the way that sounds on fast attack. For the kick drum and snare drum, it was probably slow attack. And adding a bit of top end. This 3.5 here, where this plugin is usually parked anyways, where there's a lot of cymbal stuff that you want to remove. So I leave that parked there, and I just remove some of it. I haven't even touched the mid-range. I've left the rest of the mid-range intact. So I'm adding a bit of top and a bit of bottom to feed into the compressor on fast attack, just to get a bit of, just to get it working a little more on the stuff that I wanted to work on. Nice. Tom sound nice. If I bypass the compressor, how would I do that? That's nice too. Back in. Just adds a little more stickiness, tackiness. I don't know how else to describe it, but. And then the floor tom under. Let's have a look at what I'm doing. There's actually very little compression. Keeping the attack open to slow attack. I want impact. I don't want it to flatten out. Not touching the mid-range at all, just adding a bit of top and a bit of bottom into the compressor, which is not working or barely working. Right, yeah, so, I mean, it's doing something, but because it's on slow attack, it's doing very little. With that reverb and my usual bus processing, that's if you push the reverb really loud. So there it is. Very, very simple. and really effective. And it's something I've discussed in other videos as well, where let's say you need to pick between getting an 8-channel interface and going, kick, snare, toms, stereo overheads, bottom snare, room mic, or bottom snare hi-hat, or hi-hat knee mic. That's one approach that if you're being hard to do sessions is probably the safer route to go. But let's say you're in a band, or you've just decided that you don't want to stick to that convention, and for example, you get like a 4-channel thing, but of cooler preamps, and maybe invest in cooler microphones, but maybe not have a stereo array of microphones. How do you get around coming up with compelling, interesting, and high fidelity drum sounds? And I think this is a cool kind of forgotten technique, because once these conventions of stereo overheads and having a bottom snare microphone and close mic and all the toms on top, once they came about, we kind of left some of this stuff away. But I mean, in terms of miking the toms from under, I do see a lot of pictures of Jeff Emmerich doing that with dynamic microphones with Ringo from like the Revolver era on. So it's not unheard of in the stereo. In fact, in the studio, in the studio. In fact, I mean, if any band can lay claim to really defining what the drums sounded like in the studio, it was the Beatles and Jeff Emmerich's miking, and he used to do it as well. So I wonder if that contributed to some definition in the drum sound. But for me, I think that's why I enjoy it. What I did was I took what I saw in the pictures, and I tried it out, and what I found was that it gave me this added benefit. So I'm not necessarily saying that that's why they did it. I have no idea why they did it, and we can only guess, or we can ask. We can ask somebody that was around back in the day why they mic'd things that way. But it's something that we can use today, and I like using different mic techniques, because the drum set, you can mic it a million different ways, and you'll always get a different cross section of the instrument and of the performance. And that's important. We always hear the drums the same way: stereo overheads, kick, snare, toms, then room mics from a distance. But any step you take around a drum set, you get an entirely different picture of it. It's so sensitive to the space that it's in, and it's so sensitive to the way it's being captured. It can completely change the attitude of the performance and of the natural character of the kid. So it's fun to find these cool ways to mic a drum set, and maybe you have that 8-channel preamp, but you'd like to record your band live off the floor, and so you need to use only 4 or 5 channels on the drums. I'll post a link. I did that actually in this studio with a band that I play in called the David Segretti Band, and I used something similar to this, but I used 5 microphones on the drums. So I think I also mic'd the top tom anyway, and then 2 mics on the guitar and a DI on the bass, and we played no headphones in this room, live off the floor. And so that's one example of using an 8-channel interface, but taking advantage of getting a full drum sound out of this 4-mic recording technique. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.